When we get back to the floral project, we'll start out working with the blob brush rather than the paintbrush. And when you're working with the blob brush, one of the best tools for editing your work is the eraser tool. You'll find the eraser tool just below the blob brush in the tool panel. And if you hold, you'll see the flyout menu, and the scissors tool is here in the eraser tool menu as well. And we've used the scissors tool and the eraser tool in several of my classes. I'm going to ignore the knife tool here. It works only on closed paths, not on open paths or lines, so it's a little less versatile and not right for this class. But try it yourself if you want with a closed shape if you're curious. And notice the shortcuts. The eraser tool is Shift-E, kind of like how the blob brush tool is Shift-B, so that may help you remember the shortcut. And the scissors tool shortcut, to refresh your memory, is C for cut. So here I have a blob brush stroke that I drew with a 5-point right angle calligraphic brush, and we're zoomed in here. And when I get the eraser tool, you can see it cuts through the blob brush stroke. And when I select it, you can see the eraser tool has carved this into individual closed shapes. So it's great for working on closed paths like the ones you make with the blob brush. And I'll undo that to get back to my single shape here. And so this allows you to do some fine tuning here like this, just shaving a little off the end of the stroke here and making it taper to a finer point, just carving away. And if you double click the eraser tool, you'll see all these old familiar options for changing the size and roundness and angle, and there's pressure sensitivity too. So it's like a calligraphic brush, or it's like what you see in the blob brush options dialog box. So you can make a change to the eraser tool here, or I'll close this. You can use the left and right bracket keys while you're using the eraser tool to lower and raise the diameter. And you can just go back and forth as you work using the bracket keys. Also, if you're using a Wacom tablet that has an eraser, and both my Bamboo and my Intuos 4 have an eraser on the end that engages when you flip the pen stylus over, so you just flip your pen over to summon the eraser tool. So the eraser tool is the perfect companion to the blob brush. Also, you don't have to select anything to use it. It will erase anything that isn't locked down, open paths and closed paths. But there are a few things you can't erase, like text. If you want to erase text, you have to convert it to outlines first. And you can't erase images, like the sketch we've been using in this project. Also, you can limit what gets erased by selecting the object you want to erase first, like this line here in the middle of this series of lines. So when something is selected, you can only erase the selected object. When nothing is selected, you can erase anything that's erasable on the artboard. And here I have some rectangles with a fill and a stroke. And watch what happens when I run the eraser through this shape. It carves the shape into individual shapes, and the appearance, the stroke and the fill, is reapplied to the individual shapes. So these all have the stroke around them now. And like we've seen with other drawing tools, holding Shift constrains the angle you're drawing in to 45 degrees, so you can make perfectly straight lines with the eraser tool. You can also hold down the Option or Alt key on a PC, and this lets you work with the eraser tool in rectangular marquee fashion. If you add Shift to Option or Alt, you have a square marquee eraser. So that's pretty cool, but again, notice in all of these instances, the stroke and fill is reapplied to the individual shapes. So when you cut through something with the eraser, Illustrator then re-renders the objects. And this is important to us because when we're not using the blob brush, we've been drawing with the paintbrush in this class. And this re-rendering behavior of the eraser tool makes it not such a great match for paintbrush strokes. Here I have 3 of the same strokes, all drawn with the paintbrush tool and the 5-point right angle calligraphic brush. And when I erase this first one, you can see how it's re-rendering, and the brush stroke is reapplied to the individual paths, and it's lost the original width variation. The better tool for paintbrush paths is the scissors tool. And remember, the shortcut is C for cut. And so when I cut, just by clicking in a couple places along this line, it doesn't change the brush stroke so drastically like the eraser tool did. And then there's also a tool, and this one lives under the pencil tool, and it's called the path eraser. It only works on selected paths, and it works when you drag it along the path like this. And so, like the scissors tool, it's a little more paintbrush tool friendly than the eraser tool. So for blob brush strokes, use the eraser tool and flip your pen if you have one with an eraser, or use the shortcut Shift-E. And then use the left and right bracket keys to change the size on the fly, or double-click to get its options. And for paintbrush paths, better to stick to the scissors tool or the path eraser tool. The scissors tool shortcut is C, and the path eraser tool is located under the pencil tool. And meet me in the next lesson, and we'll get back to drawing. In this lesson, we're picking up where we left off with our artwork in Lesson 9, and in this lesson we'll be working exclusively with the blob brush, adding color to the leaves and stems, and adding a few more flowers to the design. So I'll start by turning off this background color so we can see the sketch, and I want to make sure I'm on the leaf color layer. That's where we'll be working next. And I need to get the blob brush. The shortcut is Shift-B. We'll start with the 7-point angle brush, and then I'm going to check in with system preferences and my Wacom software, and here I've set my tip feel setting to right in the center, so I won't need to use as much pressure in this lesson. And I have my flower line layer locked, my flower background locked, and the leaf line layer that we were just working on locked. And here I am on the leaf color layer. And the color we'll be using for the stroke color here is leaf green. Okay, so I'm going to start, let me zoom in just a little bit here. So I'm just going to start adding color to these leaves, and having the tip feel setting a little softer than I usually work in is good for getting some of this stuff done a little more quickly without having to use as much pressure. And a lot of this doesn't take as much finesse because the line work is covering up a lot of the color that I'm adding. And I kind of like having some of the background peeking through here, so I'm not totally particular about getting everything absolutely perfect. Now here I've come to a point where I would like to have a little smaller tip here just to finish out the tip on this leaf without going outside the line here. So there are two ways that I can tackle this problem. The first is just simply using the bracket keys like we did with the eraser tool in the last lesson. The bracket keys will just raise and lower the size of the blob brush. It works for the paintbrush as well, but with the blob brush, since we're doing a lot of coloring, and I'm not trying to keep consistent line weight here because this isn't line work, then it's perfectly fine to go up and down in point size here. And then if I ever want to jump back to the actual 7-point angle that I'm using, I just go back over to the brushes panel and click on it, and you'll see my brush tip is back to its original size. So it just makes working with the blob brush really versatile. But there's one other thing I want to mention about this. So I'm going to go over to the blob brush in the tool panel and double click on it. And notice here, I mentioned this before, I like to leave Keep Selected unchecked. And that is specifically for this reason, that I'd like to be able to use the bracket keys to change the size of the brush on the fly. Well, let's go ahead and check this, and I'll hit OK, and then you can see what happens. So if I'm just working here, just coloring along, and you see my stroke is selected because I had Keep Selected checked. And then if I decide to use the bracket keys to make this brush tip smaller, I get the brush change alert warning. And so this is going to happen every time I'm using the blob brush with a calligraphic brush tip when I want to use the bracket keys. It doesn't happen when you're using the blob brush without a calligraphic brush tip, just the default blob brush. But with the calligraphic brush tip and the bracket keys, you're going to get this warning every time. And of course, that's really going to get in my way. So this is why I like to leave Keep Selected unchecked on the blob brush. Okay, so let me go over here and work a little bit more. And see, because the color is on a layer below the darker green line work, it sort of previews in front at first, but then it automatically sort of snaps back as soon as you release your pen. It goes right back to being on the layer that it is meant to be on. And then of course, if I do something that I don't like, I can always just flip my pen stylus here to get the eraser tool. And I'm just erasing this leaf color here on the leaf color line because the darker green line work layer is locked. And you can also, of course, use the shortcut Shift-E to get to the eraser tool. And like before, I'm just going to speed up the video here so it doesn't take too much time to show you all of this. Okay, and of course remember to use the space bar to get the hand tool. That makes moving around really easy. And then one other thing that I wanted to show you is right here we're using this 7-point angle brush. And if you'll remember before when we were doing our line work, we were using the 5-point right angle, and we also had a left angle brush, and these two different angles really come in handy. So here we have the 7-point angle brush, which has a 45-degree angle going toward the right. If I want to make another brush, just flipping the angle here, I don't have to start from scratch. I have this brush selected, and then I can just go up here to the options menu and choose duplicate brush. And you'll see here I have 7-point angle copy. I'll double click on the copy and then just put a minus sign here in front of the 45. And I'll go ahead and name this so I know exactly what it is, and then hit OK. All right, so now I have a 7-point left angle brush, and it's with my blob brush now, so I can just use it like this. So that's the duplicate brush option in the brushes panel options menu. Now I'm going to go ahead, zoom out a bit, turn off the sketch, and take a look at what I have here. Okay, great. So this is a good time if you want to go ahead and use your eraser tool and make any little adjustments that you need to make. And I always like to zoom way in when I do this. It just really helps, especially with the eraser tool. It really helps to do things in sort of with a little bit more control. The eraser tool takes a little bit more to control because it doesn't have the same smoothing capability. And it's kind of nice that you can work right over the line work layer here without disturbing it. It almost looks like it's disturbing it at first, but you're really only erasing what's behind it. So that is really, really handy. And let me see if I have any other areas here where I might, I don't mind off-register coloring outside of the line like this, but once again, it's just very easy to take care of it with the eraser tool like that. Okay, so I've zoomed out, I've got my blob brush again, and now I'm going to lock the leaf color layer, the layer that we were just working on, and we're going to work on shading these leaves here. And the color that we're going to use is this medium sage color. So I've got my blob brush, I've changed my color, I'm on the leaf shade layer, and I'll go ahead and start out with this original 7-point angle brush and zoom in a bit. And this is really totally up to you. There's nothing in the sketch that sort of refers to this shading, but it just adds a little extra dimension to these leaves. And I just use the undo, Command or Control Z, if I draw a line that I don't like, since I don't have Keep Selected checked here. And then I can, again, use my trusty bracket keys to change the point size on the fly. I'll just turn on the background just to preview that. Okay, and now I'm going to lock the leaf shade layer, and next we're going to be working on the small flowers background layer, and we're just going to do a few little flowers to add to the design. So let me turn off the background here so we can see. And we have several flowers here. I'm going to start with the tulips. Here's one right here. So let me go ahead and get my color set for this. It is purple. I've got my blob brush. I'm going to reset that 7-point angle brush and then make sure that I'm on the small flowers background layer. Zoom in a bit here. And let me use my bracket keys a little. Here I'm going to use the 7-point round brush. It's versatile and good for getting these little pointy tops here. And then I can just make it really big so I can color this shape in. And while I still have my purple, I'll go down to this tulip here off the bottom. Okay, and then I have a couple flowers here that are in deep pink. So I'll change my color there. Zoom into this flower right here. And I have another one up here. Another one here. Okay, and then I have a couple more flowers. These are going to be in that green gold color. So let me change my color here. This layer is on top of the leaves, so anything I draw here will cover over the leaves a little bit, but this layer is behind the main flower. Okay, and then actually these two flowers, switching to my arrow tool here, and I'll select both of these. I'm going to recolor them here at 15%. So that they're really almost white, and when we turn the background on, they show up a lot better. Alright, so we're pretty close to being finished with our floral art here, but we have some finishing touches yet to do, so meet me in the next lesson. In this final lesson, we'll add the finishing details to the design, and then I'll quickly show you how this design can work in a repeat pattern swatch. So this is kind of a bonus for those who already know about the workings of pattern swatches in Illustrator. So to start, I'm going to add a little extra leaf texture throughout the design, And I want to keep my solid background color somewhat visible for this next step. So I'll go ahead and unlock the background layer. And like we did before, I'm going to target the whole layer so that I can apply an appearance to the entire layer. In this case, I want to lower the opacity setting in the transparency panel. And so now I can see the sketch and still have a little background color. And now I'll lock that background layer so I don't disturb it. And then I'll select the leaf color layer to work on next. And I'm going to be adding a sprinkling of small leaves around the flower design. For this, I'll be using the paintbrush, and my color will be leaf green. And I like the fact that because I'm using the paintbrush, the strokes won't be in danger of merging with my blob brush strokes that are already on this layer. So if I was going to work with the blob brush for this, I'd probably make a new layer so I wouldn't risk merging with the leaf color that I've already done. So I've got the paintbrush and leaf green, and now I'm going to select the leaf texture brush. And you may want to work off to the side a bit just to get the hang of this brush and adjust your tablet software if you need to. This brush is very pressure sensitive, so the pressure is set on the diameter and it's also on the roundness. So the brush, an average pressure is about 75% round, and it gets more circular with more pressure. And again, you don't have to follow the sketch exactly. Just be careful not to stray outside the boundaries, keeping in mind you may want to try using this as a repeat pattern. So we've got the paintbrush with Keep Selected checked, so you can just draw and delete as you need to. And we're just filling in some space here, just making these simple little one-stroke leaves. Then you can zoom out and step back and see if you find anything else you need to do. And then I want to restore the opacity of the background layer, so I'll click the target and put it back to 100% opacity on the transparency panel. And then finally I want to lock the background layer again. And now I'm going to work on just adding a little bit more detail to the flowers. That's the final touch here. And so I'll lock the leaf color layer, and we're going to work on the small flowers background layer. And from here it's up to you. We've been using all the different brushes throughout this class, so you can decide which ones you want to use to finish this artwork. But I'm making the center of these flowers 50% green gold. Just doing this with the blob brush. And then I'm also going to use 50% of the leaf green color here too. And then once I finish working with the blob brush, I'll do a little bit finer detail with the paintbrush, so I can draw and delete, use the smooth tool, and just try out some different brushes and see what works for the line work detail. Alright, so work on the remaining details at your own pace. I'm jumping ahead here to the finished art, and I've just continued along, finishing these small flowers, giving them some shading and line work using the brushes we've been exploring on this project. So these last finishing touches are up to you. Just remember to keep these remaining flower details on these two layers, the small flowers background layer and the small flowers line layer, just to keep things organized. And then use any other Illustrator tricks you have in your bag. So copy and paste, move and rotate as you need to, and even play with transparency, like here in the center of these pink flowers. And here I've just used the purple color, but I gave it a blending mode of multiply and dialed back the transparency to make this a shading color that harmonizes with the rest of the art. And now I'm going to turn this art into an Illustrator repeat pattern swatch. So the first step is to lock the background layer and the sketch layer. We don't want to use those for the pattern. And then unlock every other layer. And make sure that you've cleaned up your artboard of any stray points or paths that may be hanging around. The design won't work as a pattern with extra stuff in the margin. And then copy the entire design. So I'll use the shortcut Command or Control A to select all. And now I'll jump over to a new artboard, and here I have a regular letter size artboard. The size isn't so important, but the crucial part is that you create a 6 by 6 inch square. This will be the bounding shape for the repeating unit. And place the square exactly in the upper left corner. So use the transform panel functions to make sure the upper left corner anchor point of the square is at 0 X and Y on this artboard. Next, hit Command or Control V to paste the art and quickly group it while it's still selected. And now take this one group of art and align it by its center point to that upper right corner anchor point of the square. So use the transform functions again and make sure that the center of the design is aligned to 0x and 0y on the artboard. Then, in Preferences, set your keyboard increment to 1 inch, and that way you can copy and move the design to the right by exactly 6 inches. The measurements are important to be precise about, otherwise the pattern won't work. Next, take the two designs, select them both, and copy and move them exactly 6 inches down, so that now you should have a design centered on each corner anchor point of the square, exactly 6 inches apart. And then copy one. We're going to add one more to the center and move the copy exactly 3 inches to the right and 3 inches downward so that it's sitting in the center of the other four. This center design can't cross any of these red lines here, so if you need to, scale it down a bit holding Option or Alt to keep it centered. And make sure it's inside the square on all sides. Okay, and now the most important step of all, as we talked about a lot in Illustrator 2, this red square needs to be changed to a no-fill, no-stroke square. It becomes the bounding shape for this swatch. And then send it to back. If it's not at the very back of the stacking order, the pattern swatch will not work. Okay, so I've got everything just right, and I'm going to group it all so I can keep anything from shifting. And now, the moment of truth, drag it into the swatches panel. Okay, and it looks pretty good, so I'm going to make a rectangle, make the fill active, and then I'll apply the pattern swatch to the rectangle. And there it is. Now I'll make another square, fill it with the background color that we were using before, the green gold color, and I'll send that to the back. So now my pattern has a background color, and this way you can try this pattern on a few different background colors if you like. Then you can always go back to your original art if there's anything that you want to sort of add or take out or shift around, if pieces of the design are bumping up against other pieces of the design, you can always make those adjustments and then come back and redo the steps to make a new pattern swatch. Okay, so we've come to the end of our project in Ink and Paint, and I hope you've had a good time and learned some new things about Adobe Illustrator. I want to say thank you very much for taking this class.